Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
My sister got a brand new Mercedes and a 2-week trip to Italy. I got a half-eaten sheet cake and a cheap, "Oh, it's your birthday too," from my own mother. That sentence has played on repeat in my head for the past 3 weeks, like some broken radio that just won't shut the hell up no matter how hard you try to ignore it, and it wasn't said in some dramatic movie script or posted as a joke on social media. It was my actual, lived reality, carved into memory during one of the most humiliating evenings of my life. You'd think that at 42 years old, I'd be immune to the petty slights and silent jabs my family throws my way, but that night, Claire's birthday party, or what they claimed was our birthday celebration, made it painfully clear that some wounds never scar over. They just stay raw, year after year, no matter how deep you bury them under the facade of polite smiles and forced hugs. The restaurant was high-end, the kind of place where the menus don't have prices, and the water comes with a lemon wedge by default. The lights were dim, the atmosphere too sophisticated for anything casual, and yet, sitting there in a beige silk dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago, I felt like a misplaced prop in someone else's grand performance. Everyone else was in designer outfits. Claire, of course, was practically glowing in a white jumpsuit that looked like it had been tailored in Milan and shipped overnight, just for the occasion. My mother, Susan, was buzzing from table to table like a politician on campaign day, greeting old friends and showing off her youngest daughter like a prize pony at the county fair. Dad sat by the corner, sipping his usual old-fashioned, saying little, smiling even less, doing what he always did best, blending into the background and avoiding conflict like it might stain his tie. I should have known the moment I walked in that the night wasn't meant for me. The banner said, "Happy Birthday, Claire," in big, metallic gold letters, strung above the private dining room entrance. No mention of me. Not even a shared ampersand. The balloons were all in Claire's favorite colors, pastel pink, champagne, and ivory, and the table settings were tailored to her taste. Place cards with handwritten calligraphy, menus printed with the words "Claire's Celebration Dinner," and floral arrangements that matched her Instagram aesthetic to a T. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds too long at the entrance, scanning for anything, any small nod that this was also supposed to be my day, but all I saw was the same old show, Claire in the spotlight, and me, just there. What's funny, or not funny at all, actually, is that my birthday falls exactly one day before Claire's. We used to joke about it as kids, how unfair it was that she always got the weekend parties while mine landed on a school night. But even back then, the joke felt like a cover-up for something more real. It's not like I wanted a parade or fireworks or anything extravagant. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. And that night, I didn't. Not even a little. The dinner dragged on like a bad wedding reception where you don't really know anyone and the wine keeps disappearing before you get a second glass. Claire made speeches. She laughed too loud. She posed for pictures with our parents, her husband, and her 3 kids, one of whom had the audacity to ask me if I was just a friend of the family. When I gently corrected him, telling him I was his aunt, he looked genuinely confused. I almost laughed. Almost. Then came the gifts. One after another, like a parade of indulgence. From her husband, a surprise trip to Tuscany, complete with vineyard tours and cooking classes with some Michelin-starred chef. From Mom and Dad, the keys to a brand new Mercedes, which they unveiled outside with the dramatic flair of game show hosts. From her in-laws, a bracelet encrusted with diamonds so big, they could have caused a fender bender with just one glint of sunlight. When the waiter rolled out the cake, I braced myself for at least a shared name on the frosting. Something. But it just said, "Happy Birthday, Claire." And then, like a punchline delivered too late to be funny, my mother turned to me and said, with a puzzled look that I can't forget no matter how hard I try, "Oh, is it your birthday too?" I think something inside me cracked then, not loudly, not like a plate shattering on the floor, but quietly, like a wire snapping behind a wall where no one can see, but everything shifts. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I smiled, nodded, said, "Yeah, it is," and excused myself to the restroom, clutching my purse like a lifeline, the cheap leather sticky from my sweaty grip. In the mirror, I saw a woman who had swallowed her pride too many times, who had smiled through too many forgotten phone calls, too many missed graduations, too many moments that were never hers because someone else, someone louder, shinier, easier to love, was always standing in front of her. I didn't cry in that bathroom. Not then. I just looked myself in the eye and whispered, I'm done. Done with pretending. Done with accepting crumbs and calling them blessings. Done with being the afterthought in my own life. When I came back out, no one had noticed I was gone. Claire was still the center of attention. Mom was showing someone baby pictures of Claire's youngest, and Dad was nursing his third drink, probably hoping the night would end before anyone asked him a meaningful question. I sat down, folded my napkin in my lap, and waited. Not for a gift. Not for a toast. Not for some half-hearted apology. I waited for the moment I'd really know, that I was going to walk away from all of it without looking back. And when it came, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just a look. Nina, my 17-year-old daughter, across the table, watching me with her quiet, sharp eyes. She raised one eyebrow and tilted her head slightly, just enough to ask without speaking, "You okay, Mom?" I didn't answer out loud. I just nodded once and held her gaze. And then, in the pit of my stomach, I felt it. The shift. The silence before the storm. This story isn't about what they gave Claire. It's about what they never gave me. And what I finally decided to take back. They never said it out loud, not in so many words, but you'd have to be either blind or painfully naive not to notice how the scales had always tilted in Claire's favor, how everything holidays, attention, resources, even affection, seemed to orbit around her as though she were the sun and the rest of us were just planets stuck on fixed paths, forced to revolve around whatever mood or milestone she happened to be flaunting that year. I've spent most of my life wondering if I was imagining it, if maybe I was just sensitive or jealous or maybe a little too hungry for recognition. But then I remember the birthdays from our childhood. The ones where she got Barbie dream houses and 10-speed bikes while I got board games missing pieces or sweaters one size too big, still with the tags from the discount bin, and I realized that the evidence wasn't subtle. It was just easy to ignore if you were the one being favored. I remember one Christmas in particular, probably the clearest memory I have before everything started to blur together in a sort of soft, bitter fog, and it wasn't because of anything special I received, but because of what I didn't. I must have been around 12 and Claire was 9, and while she unwrapped a mountain of gifts that included an entire American Girl doll set, complete with furniture and clothing changes, I opened 2 presents from under the tree, both from my parents. Both picked clearly in a rush, one being a puzzle of the Grand Canyon and the other, a bathrobe that still smelled like mothballs. When I looked up from the torn wrapping paper, I saw my mother already helping Claire set up the dollhouse, her voice sing-songing through the instructions, while my father, without looking at me, told me I should be grateful I got anything at all. Since we weren't made of money. That year, my grandmother pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me quietly, almost guiltily, that your sister is just easier to buy for, honey, and then kissed my forehead like that made it okay. These small dismissals, these micro-abandonments, they don't look like trauma when you write them down. They look like anecdotes, like funny family stories you share over drinks once everyone's older and can laugh at the past. But for me, they were tiny paper cuts, each one too shallow to bleed out loud, but constant enough to leave scars on every part of me that had once hoped for fairness or even basic decency. And what made it worse, what always made it worse, was that Claire never seemed to notice, or if she did, she learned early on how to treat her favoritism like it was deserved, as if being the golden child was her birthright, as if my frustration was just bitterness from someone who couldn't keep up. By the time we hit our 20s, the differences weren't just in gifts or attention, they were in opportunity. My parents helped Claire with her tuition, her first apartment, her wedding, and even her first child. When I got married at 26 to Matt, a man they never really accepted, they refused to help pay for the reception, citing financial strain. Though somehow 6 months later they managed to put down a $10,000 deposit on Claire's custom wedding dress from some boutique in Manhattan. When I asked my mother why things were always easier for Claire, she gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "Because she listens, Danielle. She's not so difficult." As if having boundaries, or asking questions, or expecting to be treated like an equal meant I was the problem. It wasn't just my parents, though they were the ringleaders. It was the entire ecosystem of our family, our extended relatives, even mutual friends. Claire was the one they all called first. Claire was the one who hosted the baby showers and got asked to be a godmother. Claire, with her Pinterest-perfect life, her doting husband, her photogenic children, her flawless reputation. And every time I showed up, whether it was for a holiday dinner or a family reunion, it was always the same. "Oh, Danielle, you still working that job? Still single? How's Nina doing?" And that was it. No real interest, no follow-up, just the obligatory small talk so they could move on to asking Claire for travel tips or parenting advice, or the recipe for her famous lemon bars, which, by the way, she didn't even bake herself, she had them catered. By the time the birthday dinner came around, the one that finally snapped whatever fragile string had been holding me in place, I had spent the better part of 4 decades playing nice, staying polite, swallowing my words and my hurt. Because confronting the truth meant tearing open a wound that I had spent years trying to stitch shut with therapy, journaling, and late-night phone calls to friends who couldn't understand why I kept going back to people who made me feel invisible. But the answer was simple: because they were my family. Because we're taught to forgive blood. Because guilt is the leash they use to keep you coming back for more. That night, sitting across from Claire as she gleefully unwrapped car keys and scrolled through the Italy itinerary on her phone while Mom beamed beside her like she'd just birthed a queen, I realized that no matter how hard I tried to explain what was wrong, they would never see it. They didn't want to. My silence had become convenient for them, proof that I was okay, that I had accepted my place as the supporting actress in the Claire show, and the moment I spoke up, the moment I demanded to be treated with the same care, I became the villain in their story. The ungrateful one. The bitter one. The one who couldn't let go of the past. But it wasn't the past that hurt. It was the present. It was the way they still forgot. The way they still overlooked. The way they still dismissed my life as somehow lesser, even though I had built it from the ground up without their help, raised Nina mostly on my own, paid every bill without begging for handouts, and stood on my own 2 feet every single time they tried to knock me sideways with their passive-aggressive remarks and cold shoulders. And now, as I sat there, blinking under the restaurant lights while everyone clinked glasses for Claire's speech, I felt something new, something steady and unfamiliar, rising up in my chest. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was resolve. Because when Nina leaned in and whispered, "You okay, Mom?" it wasn't just a question, it was a reminder. A mirror. Proof that someone did see me. That someone did care. That maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to keep playing along in a game where I'd already lost. I turned to my daughter, placed my hand gently over hers, and said quietly, "Watch this." And, just like that, everything started to shift. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over you when a decision has already been made deep within your bones, the kind of silence that doesn't demand validation or clarity or even logic. Because the decision isn't about making sense to other people. It's about reclaiming the dignity they've chipped away at, bit by bit, year after year, until you've been reduced to some bland, obedient version of yourself that's easy to manage, easier to ignore, and easier still to forget. And as I sat at that pristine white-clothed table, surrounded by clinking forks and phony laughter, the kind of laughter that fills space, but not souls, I knew with more certainty than I'd ever known anything that I was done. Not just done playing second fiddle or pretending not to notice the uneven scales, but done with the entire damn orchestra. It wasn't a moment of rage. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was a stillness, a slowing of the heartbeat, a quiet breaking of a decades-old spell. I waited, not because I was unsure, but because there was something almost sacred about letting it settle, like pausing before you walk away from a grave you finally stopped visiting. Nina sat beside me, scrolling through her phone in that half-present way teenagers do when they're trying to survive boring adult events without drawing too much attention, and I could feel her energy shift when she noticed that mine had. She's always been sharp, perceptive in ways that most people mistake for aloofness, but I saw her eyes flick to me with curiosity as I pulled my phone from my bag, not in the rushed, frantic way you do when you're trying to escape, but slow, deliberate, as if the weight of what I was about to do required reverence. And maybe it did. I opened the family group chat, the one that had been more active in the past 24 hours than it had been all year, flooded with Claire's birthday countdowns, outfit options, dinner reservations, and passive-aggressive reminders from my mother about arriving on time and dressed appropriately for photographs. I scrolled through the recent messages, Claire's selfies from the salon, Susan's overenthusiastic emojis, my father's rare thumbs-up replies that read more like obligations than actual engagement. And something about it made me feel like I was staring at a conversation I had never really been part of, like I had been CC'd by mistake on an email thread not meant for my eyes. They talked around me, through me, even about me, but rarely to me, and when they did, it was always transactional. Could you bring dessert? Could you drive Dad to the doctor? Could you pick up the kids after school? Never just, how are you? My thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to make sure I said it without spite, without venom, just the raw, unfiltered truth. They didn't deserve an essay. They didn't deserve a speech. They deserved clarity. So I typed. Thanks for making my 42nd birthday unforgettable. I finally understand where I stand with all of you. Consider this my last family event. Ever. I read it twice. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the weight of every syllable. Then I hit send. No exclamation point. No emoji. No dramatic sign-off. Just truth. Cold, quiet, and clean. Almost immediately, the read receipts lit up one by one: Claire, Susan, then Dad. No one responded, not right away, and that didn't surprise me. They weren't used to confrontation, especially not from me. I was the easy one. The one who swallowed disappointment with a smile. The one who showed up out of guilt, stayed out of politeness, and left without asking for anything. That message, as simple as it was, broke their entire understanding of who I was and what I would tolerate. And that was the point. Before anyone could reply, I went into my settings and blocked them all: my mother, my father, Claire, her husband, even my Uncle Greg, who always liked to play devil's advocate whenever I brought up anything resembling a grievance. Usually with the tired phrase, well, Danielle, maybe you're just taking it the wrong way. I even blocked my Aunt Lynn, who never did anything wrong personally, but never stood up for me either, always quiet in the background like Dad, complicit in her silence. I deleted the thread, archived the chat, then turned my phone face down on the table as the server arrived to refill our glasses. Nina looked at me with a mix of awe and concern, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had given her something real, not a lecture, not a rule, not a tired piece of motherly advice, but an actual demonstration of what self-respect looks like in action. I raised my glass slightly toward her, and she mirrored me, clinking her iced tea against my wine without saying a word, but her smirk said everything. She got it. She always had. Back at the other end of the table, Claire was still basking in the glow of her own perfection, showing off photos of her new car's interior, letting Mom and Dad fawn over the leather stitching like it was a newborn grandchild. No one noticed that I had emotionally exited the building 10 minutes earlier. No one noticed that I had just cut the final string that tethered me to their exhausting carousel of favoritism. And if they did notice, I guarantee they would find a way to make it about them. We left before dessert. Nina said she had a headache, and for once, I didn't offer to stay or explain or apologize for leaving early. I simply stood up, kissed no one, hugged no one, and walked out of that overpriced restaurant with my head held higher than it had been in years. The valet brought my car around, a 10-year-old Honda with peeling paint and a busted speaker, but as I slipped into the driver's seat, I felt a kind of peace I'd never felt behind the wheel of anything, let alone a luxury vehicle. As we pulled away, Nina asked quietly, "What happens now?" And I smiled, not with smugness, but with clarity, and said, "Now we write a new story." The rest of the drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not forced, the kind of quiet that settles around you like a warm blanket after a long, cold day. I knew the messages would come, voicemails from Susan, probably laced with guilt and confusion, a text from Claire pretending to be wounded, maybe even a half-hearted effort from Dad asking me to reconsider for the sake of the family. But I also knew I would never hear them, never read them, never give them the satisfaction of dragging me back into their orbit. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, not because I needed it to numb anything, but because I wanted to toast the version of myself that finally decided she was worth more than crumbs. And as I sat there, legs tucked under me on the couch, Nina curled beside me watching some sitcom on low volume, I realized that sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. And sometimes, one message is all it takes to start over. In the days that followed, there was no dramatic implosion, no flashing red alarms, no tearful home visits or confrontations at my front door the way one might expect when someone makes a clean and public break from their family after decades of quietly performing their assigned role. There was only silence, a thick and strange sort of quiet that wrapped itself around me like an unfamiliar blanket, equal parts comforting and disorienting, like walking through a childhood home after everything's been moved out and realizing that all the noise you used to blame for your unhappiness wasn't actually outside of you, it had always been inside the walls. And as much as I braced for backlash, waiting for the storm of passive-aggressive texts or the inevitable guilt-laced voicemails from my mother, what I got instead was far more chilling. Nothing. At first, I told myself they were shocked, stunned into inaction by the bluntness of the message I had sent and the finality of my follow-through. After all, they were used to Danielle the good sport, Danielle the resilient, Danielle the one who always came around eventually, who could be counted on to swallow the insult, smooth things over, and show up with a gift and a smile, even when the air around her reeked of subtle rejection. But this time, I had not left the door open a crack for them to slither back in with justifications and non-apologies, and I think that scared them more than anger would have, because anger is familiar in our family. It gets loud, it gets messy, and then it gets buried under casseroles and polite conversation. But silence, real silence, is something none of them know how to handle. The first sign that something had shifted came on the third day after the dinner, when I noticed that Claire had unfollowed me on Instagram, not blocked, just unfollowed, the kind of calculated move that allows someone to say, I didn't do anything dramatic, while still making their displeasure known. And then, as if in some kind of group choreography, my mother removed me from her Facebook close friends list, the one where she posts her curated reels of family holidays, church brunches, and Claire's kids' achievements, as though motherhood were a competitive sport and she had raised an Olympian. I wasn't hurt by it, not in the way I might have been years ago. Instead, it was oddly validating, confirmation that my absence was being noticed and, more importantly, that it was beginning to cause discomfort. But what surprised me more than their petty digital reactions was how calm I felt in the absence of contact, how quickly the knot in my chest that I had carried for years began to loosen, as if I had been holding my breath for half a lifetime and didn't realize until now that I could actually exhale. I didn't check my phone obsessively, didn't reread the message I sent, didn't run scenarios in my head of who was saying what behind my back, because I didn't care anymore. Or maybe I still cared a little, but not in the same debilitating way I used to. The difference now was that I wasn't waiting for them to change, to wake up, to become better versions of themselves and finally see me. I had stopped needing anything from them, and that kind of liberation doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, steadily, like morning light creeping in through a window you forgot to close. I began to reclaim things I hadn't even realized I had surrendered over the years: my weekends, my inbox, my mental space. I stopped making plans around family obligations, stopped anticipating their birthdays or anniversaries, and, more importantly, stopped wondering if they were doing the same for mine. I took Nina to the coast for a mother-daughter weekend. Just the two of us, no extended family dinners, no comparisons, no sideways glances from my mother about how I parent. We stayed in a small Airbnb that smelled like cedar and ocean salt, walked barefoot along the shoreline, and ate greasy fish tacos while laughing about nothing in particular. One night, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, and she turned to me and said, "I like you like this, Mom. You seem lighter." And I realized she was right. I had become lighter, not in body, but in spirit, in the parts of me that had been weighed down for so long by the quiet agony of being overlooked. Still, the silence didn't come without its shadows. There were moments when I felt the phantom ache of what could have been birthdays where my phone didn't ring, holidays where there were no invites, no check-ins, just an echoing absence that felt both like punishment and freedom. There were days when I caught myself imagining the other side of the story, the version my mother was probably telling at church, the one where Danielle had always been a little cold, a little dramatic, a little too sensitive for her own good. I could hear her voice in my head, soft but sharp, saying things like, "We've tried, but she's always pushed us away," or "You know how Danielle can be," and I knew, deep down, that there would never be a reckoning, never a moment where she admitted what she'd done. Or what she'd allowed to happen by doing nothing. One evening, maybe 2 weeks after the dinner, I received a message from Matt. Of all people, not a long one, just a single line. "I heard what happened. You really went nuclear, huh?" And instead of responding with sarcasm or defensiveness, I simply replied, "Did I? Or did I finally find the off switch?" He never texted back, and I didn't expect him to, because Matt, like most of them, was more comfortable with the version of me that stayed quiet and played nice, the version that didn't hold people accountable. And now that version was gone. I started therapy again, not the kind you do for damage control, but the kind where you begin the slow process of reintroducing yourself to yourself, asking hard questions and sitting with harder answers. I wrote letters I never sent, burned old photos I no longer needed to keep, and updated my will to reflect the new order of my world. Claire and my parents were no longer listed as emergency contacts or beneficiaries. Nina was the only one who mattered now. Everything else was noise. And in that silence, I began to hear myself again, not the broken, edited version that had learned to perform for approval, but the real voice that had been drowned out by decades of compromise and condescension. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was awake. And once you've tasted the clarity that comes from walking away with your spine intact, there's no going back, not even out of nostalgia. There was no apology from them, not even a half-hearted attempt, and I didn't expect one. They were who they were. But I had changed. And sometimes, that's the most radical revenge of all. A year passed like a slow, heavy tide, steady, persistent, and impossible to stop, washing away pieces of the old life I had left behind, not in one clean sweep, but in layers, as if time itself were stripping me of everything that no longer served me, that no longer fit the shape of the woman I was becoming. And as the days stacked one on top of the next, without phone calls, without family brunches, without those exhausting exchanges filled with silent tension and forced smiles, I came to understand something that once terrified me but now felt oddly liberating. Not every story needs a reconciliation arc, and not every broken bond deserves to be repaired, no matter what Hallmark movies or religious guilt might suggest. On the morning of my 43rd birthday, I woke up before the sun, not because I had anything grand planned or because some leftover sense of excitement still lingered from childhood rituals, but because I wanted to greet the day on my own terms, in silence, in solitude, with no expectations placed upon me by anyone else. The house was still quiet, Nina asleep in the next room, and the light outside just beginning to hint at morning through the slats of the blinds. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just bitter and real, like truth, and stared out the window, thinking not about who might call or forget to call, but about how different this birthday already felt from the ones that came before it. No one was throwing a party for someone else in my name. No one was pretending to care just enough to silence their own guilt. No one was handing me a half-wrapped gift from a pharmacy shelf or asking me to take photos of someone else's big moment. It was just me, and I liked it that way. Nina surprised me a few hours later with pancakes shaped like the letter D, burnt slightly on the edges, but made with such earnestness that I nearly cried when I saw them, not because they were perfect, but because they were just for me. No audience, no competition, no spotlight to steal, just a simple gesture from a daughter who had watched me claw my way back into my own life and stood by me, not just as my child, but as my witness. We spent the morning in pajamas, binge-watching a series we both pretended to like for each other's sake, and laughing at all the wrong moments, and when she asked me what I wanted to do for the rest of the day, I didn't say spa or brunch or anything performative. I said, let's drive until we're tired of driving, and so we did. We packed a small bag, nothing more than snacks, water, and a pair of sunglasses each, and we got on the highway without a destination, choosing roads not based on efficiency, but on how interesting the name sounded or how the sunlight hit the asphalt. Somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, just as we were pulling off for gas and ice cream, my phone buzzed, an unfamiliar alert, different from the regular hum of social notifications or spam emails. It was a direct message request from Claire. It had been over 300 days since I had heard from her, no apology, no explanation, not even a birthday text last year after I'd sent that final message and vanished from their world like a ghost they didn't want to acknowledge. The message was short, and though the words were sparse, they were loaded with weight in the way only family words can be. Mom's sick. She wants to see you. There was no preface, no greeting, no softening or bridge to ease the tension that had calcified between us, just a flat, clinical statement thrown into the void, a baited hook disguised as concern, dangling there like a trap wrapped in sentimentality. I stared at it longer than I care to admit, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed to be honest with myself about what I was feeling and what I wasn't. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel urgency. I didn't even feel anger, at least not the hot, reactive kind. What I felt was clarity, an overwhelming stillness that said, this is the test. Not of love or loyalty, but of boundaries. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, counting on, banking on the inevitability of mortality to drag me back in, to reel me toward guilt, to dismantle the walls I had so painstakingly built brick by brick. I didn't respond. I didn't block her again either. I simply put the phone down and walked into the gas station to buy 2 bottles of water and a pack of chocolate-covered almonds. Nina didn't ask me about the message. She must have seen the expression on my face and known that whatever had appeared on that screen wasn't worth pulling us out of the present. We got back on the road, and I let the wind from the open window tangle my hair, feeling more alive than I ever had while sitting politely at one of Susan's curated dinner tables. That evening, after we returned home, I opened my laptop, not to scroll through social media or check emails, but to finish something I had started months ago, my updated estate plan. I had drafted it during the quiet weeks following the birthday dinner, outlining clearly who would receive what, where the money would go, and who would be notified in the event of my passing. I had removed my parents, removed Claire, removed any trace of obligation to people who had treated me like a side character in their grand production. Everything now belonged to Nina. The house, the savings, the photos, the stories. She was my beginning and my ending, my reason and my legacy. As I signed the final digital signature and submitted the file for notarization, I felt a sensation that I can only describe as peace, not the kind that comes from forgiveness or closure, but the kind that settles into your bones when you realize you have finally chosen yourself, and not just once, but repeatedly, consistently, without flinching. It's not glamorous and it doesn't come with applause, but it's real. And real is enough. Later that night, I wrote one last letter, printed it, sealed it, and placed it in a drawer marked open only if I'm gone. It wasn't a plea for understanding or a list of grievances, it was just the truth, the full story from my perspective, written not to change minds, but to preserve my voice. And then, without ceremony, I burned the old family photo albums, the ones where I'm smiling but not seen, present but peripheral, and as the pages curled and blackened, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt release. Before bed, Nina handed me a small wrapped box with a ribbon she'd tied herself. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a pen engraved with my name. For your next chapter, she said, and I knew, in that simple, perfect moment, that the life I had been waiting for was no longer out of reach, it was already here, already happening, already mine. The next morning, I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Italy plans, and unlike the fake itinerary my sister had paraded around during that infamous dinner, this one was real. Booked. Paid for. Just me, a suitcase, and a passport with pages still begging to be stamped. And I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not because I was hiding, but because, for the first time in my life, I owed no explanations. They can keep their version of the story, with all its omissions and justifications and twisted timelines, and I'll keep mine honest, incomplete, and entirely my own. And maybe one day, they'll wonder what became of me. Maybe they'll talk about that birthday dinner as the moment I lost it. Or maybe, if they're brave enough to be honest, they'll admit it was the moment I finally woke up. Either way, I won't be there to correct them. Some stories are better left unfinished.